Welcome to Blooming Wand, your home for grounded spiritual content. I'm Emily O'Neill, evidential psychic medium, intuitive healer, and mentor. And on today's episode, I really want to dive into exploring anger. And I want to talk about why I think we need to make our anger our best friend. It's a powerful emotion that I think can drive a lot of change in our lives, but it's also an emotion that many of us are taught to suppress, repress, ignore. And I don't know about you, but I have not had a very strong relationship with my anger until recently. I would say within the last maybe 5 years, I've started to understand how to feel my emotions and be present with them. And that's why I want to dive into this conversation with you, is because I think I'm not the only one that's had a hard time engaging with some of the more complicated emotions, which it does include anger. So, we're at a moment in time where the world feels really chaotic and uncertain. We're watching immigration enforcement escalate into violence, if you want to call it enforcement. And I'm sure you've all seen the videos of American citizens being murdered in the streets by ICE. And we know people, including children, are being detained without due process. And just as we're trying to process all of this, amongst many other things, the Epstein files get released, and we're confronted all over again with how power protects predators while survivors wait decades for even the smallest acknowledgement of harm. The news cycle brings fresh outrages every single day. And that's what got me thinking about anger and how everything that I've been seeing has been being channeled or processed through my body. And I thought, well, I bet the community could use some support around the anger that they might or you might be feeling. So we've just kind of talked about collective stuff that's happening in the world, but closer to home, you're probably navigating difficult relationships where you can never quite say what you mean, a workplace where your ideas maybe get credited to someone else, or family dynamics where you're expected to keep the peace no matter what it costs you. There's just constant pressure to keep it together when everything feels like it's falling apart. And if you're feeling angry right now, either about both maybe collective and personal things, let me say this super clearly. Your anger is not only valid, but it's extremely necessary. It's an alarm bell telling you that something is deeply wrong and needs your attention. But here's what I see in my practice over and over. That is my practice with clients here at Blooming Wand, is people don't even know when they're angry. That was the case for me up until a couple years ago. So they'll come to me with migraines, digestive issues, chronic exhaustions, or this pervasive sense of numbness. This was a really common one. And they describe feeling depressed or anxious, but they would never use the word angry to describe themselves. And when I gently ask, is there any anger there? They genuinely look confused and they're like, angry? I don't really get angry. I'm not an angry person. So this is really common. And I think it's because many of us are we're not taught to recognize our anger, let alone process it or channel it toward change. We get conflicting messages about anger. Don't be angry. It's unspiritual, unfeminine, uncivilized. Or quite the opposite. We're told, punch a pillow, scream into the void, just let it all out. And frankly, neither approach actually helps us develop a mature relationship with one of our most powerful emotions. I don't know about you, but as I've mentioned before, I've historically had a hard time cultivating a relationship to my anger. Now, that said, once I did, everything changed. I realized anger was one of the most important emotions I could have. And once I stopped fearing it, I realized I could use anger as a tool, as an agent for transformation and change. And anger, frankly, has become one of my favorite tools for understanding myself, my needs, and what changes I need to make in my life. So ask yourself, what if anger isn't something to transcend or eliminate, but a vehicle for necessary change? And what if the real spiritual work isn't about becoming perpetually calm, but learning to work skillfully with the fire of anger? Now let's dive into what anger actually is and why it matters. So let me start with the basics, because understanding what's happening in your body and brain can help you hold this emotion more gently. At a neural level, anger involves your amygdala. That's your threat detection center. And that's the part of your brain that's constantly scanning for danger. And your ventromedial prefrontal cortex, which is your emotional regulation hub. So think of anger as your nervous system's alarm bell. It's information. It tells you when boundaries have been crossed, when something matters very deeply to you, and when a situation requires your attention. Here's what makes anger different from other difficult emotions. It's fundamentally an approach emotion. Unlike fear, which makes you want to flee, anger mobilizes you to move towards the problem. When you feel angry, you want to do something. You feel energy, you feel power, you feel momentum. And this is precisely why anger becomes a vehicle for change, both personally and collectively. Pema Chodron writes that, quote, feelings like disappointment, embarrassment, irritation, resentment, anger, jealousy, and fear, instead of being bad news, are actually very clear moments that teach us where it is that we are actually holding back. Your anger is showing you exactly where change needs to happen. Maybe that's also why it makes us so uncomfortable. Maybe we're not ready for those changes. Your anger about what's happening in the world right now, about survivors of abuse watching their abusers' networks get protected, about being dismissed at work, about being taken for granted in your relationship, that anger is information. Hold that gently. It's trying to tell you something that's really important. So, I want to talk about hidden anger, understanding both suppression and repression, because I have learned through conversations with clients and others that many of us actually don't recognize our anger. It sounds crazy because anger is such a powerful emotion and we've seen it, many of us have seen it in our lives, but when we really try to build a relationship with it within ourselves, I think you'll find that you may not be recognizing it or noticing its presence even though it's there. And that's why I want to talk about suppression and repression. So let's define those terms clearly. Repression is when anger gets pushed so far down that you genuinely don't know that it's there. It's unconscious. You're not choosing to hide it. You've buried it so completely that you've lost access to it entirely. This is the client who tells me, I never get angry. I just don't feel that emotion, while their jaw's clenched tight enough to crack teeth. I see this all the time where people tell me, I'm not angry, I don't feel that, but I can see all these signs and signals that they're giving me through subtle body cues that they do actually have anger. Now, suppression is different. With suppression, you know that you're angry, you feel it, but you make a conscious choice not to express it. You smile through the meeting where your boss takes credit for your work. You say, it's fine, when it's absolutely not fine. You feel the anger, but you push it down deliberately. Now, here's the question. Why do we do this? Most of it comes from childhood. Maybe you had caregivers who rarely showed emotion or talked about feelings. Maybe you were shamed or punished for expressing anger. Maybe you were told that your emotions were wrong or that you were too sensitive or that, quote, nice girls don't get angry. Maybe expressing anger in your household meant that somebody got hurt. So you learned that anger equals danger. I think that's a really common one. You know, I had a client who literally could not access the word angry about anything. She described situations that would make anyone furious, like being sexually harassed at work or watching her mother belittle her in front of her kids. And she'd say it felt uncomfortable, it was frustrating. And when I gently reflected to her, that sounds like it might have made you angry, she physically recoiled and was like, oh no, I don't get angry. Angry people are mean. And that really stuck with me. That's repression. The anger is there, but she couldn't see it because somewhere along the way she learned that anger made her unlovable or unlikable. And for many women, there are additional layers. And research shows that when women express anger, they're more likely to be labeled as difficult, emotional, and hysterical. I think we have all heard about women being called bitches when they're angry and things like that. And I work with a lot of women who don't want to be viewed in that way. And there's a lot of reasons why that is, but it prevents them from accessing their anger. So we learn to camouflage our anger and we essentially redirect it inward, where it shows up as headaches, digestive issues, chronic pain, and many other things. Now, for men, the pattern can kind of be flipped. It can look very different. Expressing anger outwardly may be more socially acceptable, but the vulnerability or hurt, like the vulnerable or hurt feelings beneath that anger, feel too threatening to acknowledge. So anger becomes the only acceptable emotion, while sadness, fear, and pain get buried underneath. So, the common thread, we learn that anger threatens our connections, our safety, our belonging. So, we bury it. We become nice. We accommodate. We people please. And the anger goes underground. Now, what happens to buried anger? I can tell you one thing right now, it doesn't go away. Here's the thing about repressed anger, it doesn't disappear. It transforms, it shapeshifts, and the consequences of this will ripple through every dimension of your life. So, in your mind, let's kind of explore what happens to the mind when we suppress anger. So, psychoanalysts have known for over a century that repressed anger turned inward becomes depression. The anger becomes self directed, and you start attacking yourself instead of addressing what's actually wrong. And this can come through thoughts and ideas and mental loops that you start to develop. I see this constantly. Someone comes in feeling numb, exhausted, like they're moving through life underwater, and we start exploring. And underneath that flatness is a mountain of unfelt rage at their family, at their job, at the ways that they've had to shrink themselves to be kind of, quote, accepted or acceptable. And the energy that it takes to keep anger buried is enormous. And people with deeply repressed anger often describe feeling chronically lethargic and tired. Nothing excites them. They rarely feel angry, but they also rarely feel much of anything else. The anger has taken all their vital life force energy and consumed it. And sometimes repression can create paranoia or even like let me describe that better. So rather than acknowledging your own hostile feelings, people will project them outward. So everybody's angry at me. People are judging me. The world feels dangerous. When in reality, it's our own unfelt anger that we're encountering that everywhere that we look. So it can do funny things with our perception of what's going on around us in our bodies. It's really fascinating what anger can do when we don't acknowledge it. Dr. Gabor Mate writes that when emotions are repressed, this inhibition disarms the body's defense against illness. So repression disorganizes and confuses our physiological defenses so that these defenses go awry, becoming the destroyers of health rather than its protectors. So your body truly does keep the score. The anger that you don't express gets expressed through your body instead. So anger will always find a way to communicate. And this communication can manifest in strange and interesting ways if we don't build a relationship to this incredibly powerful emotion. Now, the research does back this up. Suppressing anger is linked to higher blood pressure, digestive issues like IBS, chronic pain syndromes, and compromised immune function. When anger becomes ingrained, like an ingrained pattern of repression, so not expressing it, you experienced prolonged exposure to high cortisol, which wreaks havoc on almost every system in your body. So I worked with a client who had debilitating migraines about 3 times a week. They were very frequent, and we tried everything. We talked about diet, sleep hygiene, stress management. Obviously, she talked to her doctors. And finally, we started exploring what was happening right before the migraines hit. And every single time, it was after a situation where she couldn't speak up. Her mother criticized her parenting, migraine. Her colleague undermined her in a meeting, migraine. Her partner dismissed her feelings, migraine. Her body was expressing what her voice couldn't. And that's what I mean about anger. It will find a way to get your attention. And the ways that it does that can be pretty miraculous and pretty interesting. So this is why we're talking about anger, is it's so powerful. And I think that the way that it wants to come out when we don't engage it is also very powerful. It's not going to get your attention in subtle ways. I think a lot of times those ways are actually pretty potent and strong. We just misinterpret the signals. Now, how anger can manifest in your relationships when you're not engaged with it in a healthy way, this is kind of where it can get painful. People transfer their original fear, usually the childhood fear of abandonment or punishment, onto everybody in their current life. All authority figures become people they're deeply afraid of offending. And this, is another thing that can be subtle. You might not realize that this is what's going on, but even friends and peers and colleagues, maybe even strangers, we don't speak up when lines are crossed because something in our system is saying, don't do that. We don't want to be seen as mean. Maybe we don't want to be seen as somebody who's not likable or lovable. So that fear of abandonment or punishment kicks in, and we just don't speak up when we need to. But anger doesn't just disappear because you don't express it directly, it leaks out in other ways. We've talked about that. That can look like passive aggressive comments, resentment that builds until you suddenly cut somebody completely out of your life, explosive reactions to minor triggers while the real source of your pain and anger remains unaddressed. You snap at your partner for leaving the dishes in the sink when you're actually furious that your boss undermined you in a meeting. You become irritable with everyone around you when you really can't acknowledge that it's your rage about maybe systematic injustice that you haven't been able to express or understand. So anger finds a way out. It goes to the wrong address, though. So we sometimes misdirect it and we damage the relationships that matter to us most while never actually addressing what we're truly angry about. So, one of the other things I wanted to talk about was the myth of venting, or kind of why the rage rooms aren't doing what you think they're doing. So, if repression causes all the problems that we've been talking about, should we just let it rip? Should we just like explode and punch a pillow or go to a rage room or scream into the void to get it all out? No, not so fast. A 2024 meta analysis of 154 studies involving over 10,000 participants found that arousal increasing activities, so hitting punching bags, going for an angry run, intense physical catharsis, they were largely ineffective at reducing anger, and in some cases, it increased it. So that rage room you've been eyeing, it's not doing what you think it is. You're essentially practicing getting more activated and teaching your nervous system that the appropriate response to anger is escalation, which is probably not what we want to be doing. So, what did work? Activities that decreased physiological arousal. So, deep breathing, meditation, mindfulness, progressive muscle relaxation. The researchers described it as turning down the heat rather than stoking the fire. Now, this doesn't mean that anger should be ignored or stuffed down. That's definitely not what I'm saying. It means that we need to learn how to be with the anger in a way that allows us to access its wisdom without being consumed by its fire. So, if punching pillows doesn't work and repression creates illness, what does work? The answer lies in fundamentally changing your relationship to anger, not eliminating it, but also not amplifying it, but we transform how we hold it and be present with it. So we want to feel it fully, but lower the arousal. So here's the paradox at the heart of anger work. You must feel the emotion completely while simultaneously calming your nervous system. And this is a skill. It's a skill that I wasn't taught until very late in life. So be gentle with yourself, be patient with yourself if this is new to you. Anger has power. It can blow the cork off your emotional volcano and release the turmoil below, the grief, the sadness, the helplessness. Those are all disempowering emotions. Anger is empowering. It contains energy for change. The key is learning to harness that energy rather than be consumed by it. So, what's the practice? How about some mindfulness for anger? So, let me walk you through a practice, and you can do this right now, or you can come back to it when anger arises. So, you're just going to find a comfortable seat, and you're going to check in with your body by engaging your breath. So, just a couple inhales and exhales until you feel settled, and feel where your body makes contact with the chair or the cushion, and just notice your breath without trying to change it. Just observe the inhale and the exhale, that in and out, the rise and fall of your chest and your belly. Now bring to mind a situation that angered you. Don't go for your biggest point of anger or rage. Start with something that's moderately irritating, and notice where in the body do you experience this anger, and really explore this. You may be tempted to push the feeling away, but instead you want to get curious and investigate how it feels. So what's the sensation? Is it in your chest, your throat, your jaw, your belly? Does it feel hot? Does it feel cold? Does it feel tight or expansive? Does it pulse, or does it sit heavy and still within your body? And notice what sensations emerge. Does the anger increase or decrease in intensity as you watch it? Does it change or move? And if you don't feel anything, just give yourself a couple of breath cycles. Sometimes we have to build that communion with the body and being present for the sensations that want to emerge. And I want you to practice bringing compassion to the anger, to the sensations that you're feeling in your body. The feeling of anger is normal, it's part of being human. And if you can cradle it with your awareness, like a mother cradling a newborn, what happens? What happens when you hold it gently with tenderness and care? You might notice that you stop fighting the anger, when you stop trying to make it go away, and it can shift on its own, not because you're forcing it to change, but because you're finally giving it the attention that it's been demanding. And that's essentially what anger wants, is your attention, not your avoidance. Slowly bring your attention back to the breath and stay with it for a while, letting your emotions settle into the spaciousness of your breath and your awareness. Now, I want to point out that I have created a worksheet to help us assess and build a relationship with our anger. I'll have a link to it in the newsletter, as well as on the website, but you can go to bloomingwand.com, go to the shop, you'll see the anger worksheet there for you. So there's lots of exercises for you to see kind of like, what is my relationship to anger? Do I have the capacity to even notice the sensations in my body? And then some practices around building the skill of being present with your anger. I always like to provide you with practical tools that you can engage with on your own or with your helpers. I think worksheets are really helpful because I don't know about you, but I often don't know where to start with some of these topics. It's like, okay, I listened to the podcast, I did the things, but when it comes to my own personal practice, it's hard for me to know where to begin, which is why I create these worksheets for you, because it's something I know I would need. Now let's go over the 3 R's of mindful anger. When anger arises in daily life, you can use this simple framework. Number 1, recognize that anger is present. So name it. Anger is here. You might notice it through sensations in the body. Number 2, realize it's okay to feel this way. This is information, not a moral failing. And number 3, return to your breath. Take 3 deep breaths, in for 4, hold for 4, out for 6. So what I'm trying to say is inhale for 4, hold for 4, and then exhale for 6. And this can really help you decrease that arousal and be present for what you're feeling so that you can acknowledge what's going on within you. That longer exhale, so that out for 6, activates your parasympathetic nervous system and begins to calm the anger response. And you can do this anywhere. You can do it in the meeting if you're noticing you're getting really frustrated in a meeting, in the car, in the middle of a difficult conversation. When we're angry, we do tend to become the anger. So it can be all consuming, and the breath becomes quick, shallow, agitated. The mind and body become disconnected. So returning to the breath brings you back to yourself so that you can be present for what you're experiencing and the emotion and the signals that your body is giving you. Now, I want to also talk about that anger is a vehicle for change. We need our anger for change. When we stop repressing anger and start working with it consciously, something profound happens. The anger reveals what we value. It shows us where our boundaries need to be drawn and to be reinforced. It illuminates injustice that we might otherwise tolerate. So let's be clear, there's a crucial difference between righteous anger or righteous rage and destructive rage. Righteous anger fuels sustained action for justice. It drove the civil rights movement, the labor movement, the suffragette movement, and every major social transformation in human history. Righteous anger says, this is not acceptable, and I will work to change it. Destructive rage burns hot and fast, leaving wreckage and creating no lasting change. It lashes out without purpose, it harms indiscriminately, and it ultimately exhausts itself. The difference isn't in the intensity of the feeling. So I'll say that again. The difference is not in the intensity of the feeling. It's in our relationship to it and how we choose, what we choose to do with this energy. So Thich Nhat Hanh teaches, and this is a quote from him, we should not fight our anger because anger is ourself, a big part of ourself. Anger is is of an organic nature like love, and we have to take good care of anger. And because it is an organic entity, it is possible to transform it into another organic entity. The garbage can be transformed into compost, which can be turned into lettuce and into the cucumber. So it's this idea that anger can be transformed into some wonderful things. Your anger is not garbage to throw away, it's raw material for transformation. So let's kind of talk about a framework for your anger practice. So when anger arises, you can try this. Notice what's going on. You're going to name it. You're going to locate it in your body, and you're going to rate it on a scale of 1 to 10. So what's the intensity? The second step is you're going to create space. You're going to take some breaths to begin lowering the arousal. So if you're at a level 10, you're going to do that breathing exercise and maybe kind of get it down to a lower level so you can hold space for it. And you're going to remind yourself that this is information, not an emergency. Anger can feel like an emergency. And again, it's an activating emotion and it wants you to do something. Well, in order to know what it wants you to do and what it needs from you, we need to take those breaths, that inhale for 4, that hold for 4, that exhale for 6. And what this will allow us to do is kind of bring us to step 3, investigate. What boundary was crossed? What value needs to be protected? And what is your anger really trying to tell you? And this moves us into step 4, which is process. We use mindfulness to hold the anger with compassion. We can journal about what the anger is teaching us, and we can identify the specific change that needs to happen, what we need, what the anger is needing from us. And step 5, we get to choose our response. So we separate the anger from the action so you can feel furious and still choose how you want to respond, and then communicate assertively, not aggressively. And we want to focus on the behavior that needs to change, not attacking our own character or other people's character. And we need to be specific about what we need. So this will help us take action that aligns with our values. And I want to give you a concrete example. You're in a meeting and your boss takes credit for your work again. This is something that used to happen to me. You notice your anger rising. It's a 7 out of 10 in intensity. There's a tight chest, clenched jaw. You take 3 deep breaths there in the meeting, and later you investigate what boundary was crossed. Well, my contribution deserves acknowledgement. What value does this protect? My professional integrity and my self-worth. What needs to change? I need to document my work and speak up in the next meeting and say, hey, that was my idea. The anger hasn't disappeared, but now it has direction. Now it can fuel change instead of just churning inside of you or leaking out sideways at your partner later. Like you go home and yell at somebody because you got mad at work. So that's misdirected anger. I do think that anger has a sacred function. So your anger about what's happening in the world right now, about ICE killing American citizens in the street, about the Epstein files reviewing how power protects predators while survivors wait decades for justice, that anger can fuel action. It can drive you to contact your representative, to show up at a community meeting, to support organizations doing the hard work, and it can connect you with others who also refuse to accept these things as normal. So it can connect you with people that share your values. Your anger at being dismissed, undermined, or taken for granted in your personal life, that anger can help you set boundaries that you've been too afraid to set. It can give you the clarity to see what's not working and the energy to change it. The spiritual work isn't about transcending anger. It's about developing the capacity to do these things, to feel it completely without being consumed by it, to use it as information about what matters to you. Anger is always going to tell you what matters to you. It's one of the most awesome things that it does. The other thing you want to do is lower the physiological arousal response that we have when we're angry so we can think clearly and hold it gently and communicate with that part of ourselves. And this allows us to choose a response that creates the change that you want to see. So we can transform rage into focused strategic action. Pema Chodron asks us to see difficulties as teachers. She says if there is no teacher around to give us direct personal guidance on how to stop causing harm, never fear. Life itself will provide opportunities for learning. Without the inconsiderate neighbor, where will we find the chance to practice patience? Without the office bully, how could we ever get the chance to know the energy of anger so intimately that it loses its destructive power? When we become aware of our emotions, we learn why we feel the way we do, which is one of the most wonderful things in the world. It's a practice, but it's so helpful. And when we learn why we feel the way we do, our emotions become productive rather than destructive forces. And I don't know about you, but I have seen emotions become destructive and cause harm and be directed in ways that maybe weren't very helpful. And because I've seen a lot of that, as I'm sure you have too, I know I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that anymore. And that's one of the things that I work hard on is my relationship to my anger. So anger usually appears when we fail to set healthy boundaries. I've said this before, and yes, I do have a boundaries episode, and yes, I do have a boundaries worksheet. If you're like, what are boundaries? I've got some resources out there for you around that. If we don't recognize what our anger is trying to tell us, so we don't recognize the wisdom of our anger, it descends into violence, hatred, fear, and destruction. But when we do learn to work with it skillfully, it becomes a compass pointing towards what needs to change. And I really like to lean into the fire metaphor because anger does feel like a fire when I'm working with children and helping them understand their anger. I volunteer at a school and I play games with some 4 and 5-year-olds. And let me tell you, they get mad when they don't win the game. And we talk about what does anger feel like. And they often always say, a fire. I feel like I'm on fire. So the fire metaphor, I think, is pretty helpful. So we want to think of anger as a fire. Unattended, it burns your house down. Suppressed, it smolders in the walls until everything collapses. But tended skillfully, so contained, directed, honored for its heat and its light, it can forge tools, warm communities, and illuminate what was hidden in the darkness. The fire itself is not the problem. The anger is not the problem. The question is, have you learned to work with it? Have you learned to work with your fire? Your anger is not a spiritual failing. It's a teacher, a protector, and sometimes a revolutionary. And right now, in this moment of collective difficulty, your anger matters. The anger you feel watching the news, the anger at systems that harm vulnerable people, the anger at being silenced or dismissed in your own life, all of it is valid. All of it contains information, and all of it can be transformed into energy for meaningful change. The question is, are you listening to what your anger is trying to tell you? And more importantly, are you willing to let it move you towards necessary change? So again, I've created a worksheet to help you explore your relationship to anger. It gives you a step-by-step process to assess and address your anger in practical, tangible ways. You can find it at bloomingwand.com. Click explore, go to the store, and you can download it for free right there. And I just want to say that if you get the newsletter, you'll get a link to my blog, which is basically a transcript of this episode, and it will have sources for further reading or kind of where I got the information that I got and shared in this episode. And I also want to say that if your anger feels uncontrollable or it feels like it could lead to violence or stems from unprocessed trauma, don't ever hesitate to reach out to a licensed therapist or somebody who's trained in anger management or has trauma-informed or focused approaches, there's no shame in seeking professional support for working with difficult emotions. And if you feel that it's appropriate, this is something that I feel I work with a lot of my clients on. So you can always reach out to me if you're wondering about what it's like to work with me. We'll do a discovery call. You can book that for free and we can chat about if I'm the right resource for you. But mostly, try the worksheet and see if that's helpful. That's a nice place to start. And you know what I'm going to say? Take good care of yourselves, get your journals out, and I'll see you soon.